Hey, this is your general speaking. The day after we recorded 2 weeks worth of Poets at War, I am trying to get these things together and all scheduled and stuff before the G3 conference where I will be working. And as a result, I do not have a whole lot of time to make all the fancy graphics and everything else that's going on. And these are going to be very basic screen recording podcasts visually. I am going to try and put in all the audio stuff. You guys know the drill. 7.5, probably 8 minutes in, whatever the case may be, is when the podcast starts after the long intro. And let's get into it. This is Poets at War.
Once there were 4 children, whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy.
Suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her book. Next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who's got to live in the imaginary time of the story, there's no interval between putting down the book and hearing the knock. But I, her creator, between writing the first part of that sentence and the second, may have gone out for an hour's walk and spent the whole hour thinking about Mary.
We make things by the law in which we are made. We create because we are created.
In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit.
One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, in the darkness bind them.
Tolkien and Lewis, both in their way, lifted me out of this world to show me a thundering beauty. And when I read the last sentence and came tumbling back to earth, I could still hear the peal. I hear it to this day. God allowed those stories to lift the veil on the imaginary world to show me the real world behind it, which ended up being, in the end, the one I was already in. The real world, at least in part, isn't out there somewhere, nor is it in my mind. It's here, right under my feet, all around me. Tolkien and Lewis held the fabric of Narnia or Middle-earth in one hand and clutched our world in the other, building a bridge across which we could set out for perilous realms, and yet return safely with some of the beauty we found there.
My first and last philosophy, that which I believe in with unbroken certainty, I learnt in the nursery. I generally learnt it from a nurse, that is, from the solemn and star-appointed priestess at once of democracy and tradition. The things I believed most then, the things I believe most now, are the things called fairy tales.
We live in a moment that's unlike any other moment, a moment of bizarre tyranny, a moment of overreach.
I was nearly torn apart by a crazy doctor.
A moment of fear. It's like, and how are we living? How are we standing up in this moment?
I was made asleep by a bunch of mangy pirates.
Are we full of joy? Like, are we characters who are full of joy and unafraid?
And eaten, got that? Eaten by a fire-breathing dragon. And not to mention being tossed, squashed, and scared practically to death.
It's like, how do we image God in this particular narrative in which we've been placed, in this chapter? And we get trained for that by reading about Sam and Frodo and Aragorn and Gandalf, and reading, Charlotte's Web and Animal Farm, and reading about Prince Caspian. Like, when you're little, you read those things, and you read stories when you're older, and it reinforces what is the courageous action of a character in this moment.
Yet you stand before me.
Well, yeah.
Think, boy. What kind of an adventure would you have had if I brought you here with a turn of the page?
I wept bitterly, and then I said to myself, when everything happens quite miserably, then He sends help. I have always read so. People must first of all suffer a great deal before they can bring anything to accomplishment.
God, who at various times and in various ways spoke in time past to the fathers by the prophets, has in these last days spoken to us by His Son, whom He has appointed heir of all things, through whom also He made the worlds.
For I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. For the earnest expectation of the creation eagerly waits for the revealing of the sons of God. For the creation was subjected to futility, not willingly, but because of Him who subjected it in hope. Because the creation itself also will be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groans and labors with birth pangs together until now. Not only that, but we also who have the first fruits of the Spirit, even we ourselves, groan within ourselves, eagerly waiting for the adoption, the redemption of our body.
Minstrel boy to the war is gone. In the ranks of death you'll find him. His father's sword he had girded on, and his wild harp slung behind him. God of song, said the warrior bard, though all the world betray thee, one sword at least thy right shall guard, one faithful harp shall praise thee. The minstrel fell, but the foeman's chain could not bring that proud soul under. The harp he loved ne'er spoke again, for he tore its cords asunder, and said, no chain shall sully thee, thou soul of love and bravery. Thy songs were made for the pure and free, they shall never sound in slavery. The chains upon the people came, and they gave away their freedom. No prophets left, they then grew lame, they accepted their false kingdom. But one young man saw the minstrel boy, and he took up the shredded strings, and with great love remade with joy the sacred tool for truth to sing. This week we have an interview with Freddy Morales, author of Mercy in Motion, and let's go ahead and get into that. It was a really fun talk.
And I just want to say,
yeah.
thank you for reading. Really, thank you for reading the book.
Yeah.
That's just very kind of you to do that.
Well,
so thank you.
You're the first person that's ever wanted to send me something, so I'm like, yeah, of course. You know what I mean? I'm like, yes, please. I don't, even if it's not a good book, the fact is you sent me something.
Right.
Like, I'm gonna accept it.
Right,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? So, but the title was one of the things that, like, I think I kind of know where you're going with it, but I'm not sure, and I wanted to ask you about that first with the title, because titles are one of those weird things where Canon Press has dealt with this, a bunch of other people have dealt with this, where it's like, especially for nonfiction, if it's not snappy enough, people go crazy.
Right.
You know, but like at the same time, this is your first book, you're probably not even looking to like do a whole lot with it necessarily other than get it out. So like what was the point of the title?
Right, and I guess I should tell you, so this work, originally it started as a larger, not I wouldn't say larger book, it was like a 150-page book.
Okay.
And I called it, it was called Misrepresentation, the Misglorification of the First-Person Storyteller and the Appropriation of God.
Nice. I love that you have that memorized.
Well, because it was just like a big thing for me. And so anyways, long story short, what you're reading is the first part of that bigger book, and I took out the other part because I felt it wasn't concise enough. It wasn't. It just felt like two different books basically.
Right.
And it needed more shortening down. So I didn't want to use that title for this book. And so what stood out for me with Mercy in Motion was, I think if I could break it down to a passage, and this is only half of it, but Romans 9. The tail end of Romans 9, where he says, Let me read it.
Sure, why not? Go for it.
But butcher it, right?
That's all good.
Let's see. He goes, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy. Now, that's half the story, right? You could put that under, if it's something's common grace, you could put that under saving grace, right? But there is, I felt that there's mercy in common grace, right? God's sustaining grace, his showing these richness and beauty that we see daily in unbelievers and believers. So I felt that was an appropriate title, Mercy in Motion, just because even if you're not a Christian, you get to be a part of that mercy,
right?
In that sense. Now, yeah. So, but
the emotion
not
thing
in the saving sense
was themed closely to all the movie quotes too, maybe.
I'll say that again.
I was thinking that the motion part could have been themed to all the movie quotes too.
Right. So there is a tie-in for cinema for sure. I mean, it's like I said early on in my life, I didn't read a lot of books, and it's just the world I grew up in. It just
well, it's still literature.
Now
that's the thing. Like people don't think of it as literature, but especially the films that you're referencing. Well, I'm not the hugest fan of cinema that takes itself too seriously and uses words like cinema. I'm more in the animation side of things, and I'm interested in. I mean, you look at the kind of literature I'm interested in on the surface, like fairy tales and stuff. I'm more into generally like crafting stuff that is timeless kids family entertainment versus like the more heady dramas and things of that nature, though I do like those too. But yeah, we'll get back to that in just a second. We got people listening, and I just want to talk with you, but I guess you should probably introduce yourself a little bit, just who you are and why you're here and that sort of a thing, just so that we have that going for us.
Well, no, definitely. And as you said, I'm the first person to send you a book. You're the first person to interview me.
Right. There you go.
There you go. Perfect. So I guess, well, my name is Freddy Morales. I live in Houston, Texas. I'm married. 14 years. Yes, 14 years. And then married, and then I have one child, Isabella. She's going to be 2 on Friday, so I'm really excited about that. Pretty much born in Los Angeles, raised in Houston. And then I got saved when I went back to California. And so I've been walking with the Lord for about 20 years now.
Fantastic.
This was in 2003, so...
Yeah.
Short and sweet.
You were saying something like, you can come to me for advice on kids. Well, you've got me beat by quite a bit for marriage. We've been married for about 6, almost 7 years. So yeah, but
that's a long time too, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, yeah, that's about half of what you got. So, but yeah, so you go into your conversion briefly, but do you want to give a more like semi-complete testimony, or do we want to move forward, or is that going to come out when we do?
So,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so when I was 19, going on 20, I think, I moved back to Los Angeles, and I wanted to be an actor. Right, so film had such an effect on me that I didn't know what else to do with my life. That's what I wanted, to make movies, right? So I did that whole thing. I was there for 2 years. I lived in my car for 2 years. That was the life that I wanted, but the beginning part of going to California, I was working at IHOP, I believe, and there was a group of college students, and I just talked to them, tried to take their order, and of course, they were Christians, so they invited me to go to their church, and at that point, I didn't really want anything to do with religion because I didn't grow up in a religious home, but I thought, what the heck, I'll just go anyways, so I did, and then through a series of events, God was just opening doors left and right for me in terms of seeing Jesus as God. So I ended up going to one of the services. I think they had an altar call, and I can't remember if I went up to the front or not, but I ended up giving my life to Christ then and there, and through another series of events, moved back to Texas to help my family out, and I've been here ever since. So that was in 2005. 2005 that I left California. So I was there for 2 years, 2003 to 2005. I had some success making some films, nothing you would know about. The stuff that, like horror films and stuff like that, but nothing that I'm really proud of. But
I gotcha.
anyways,
I gotcha. Well, hey, you're making film. That's still working.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
exactly.
I'm always happy with people who are actually doing it, actually making something happen. So, but the thing that intrigued me beyond just our few interactions we had before you sent me the book was you're a reform guy. I've seen you around on some social media stuff. You mentioned that you'd seen some of Poets at War before, and kind of what I do in that space, at least in my nonfiction space. So you definitely probably have heard some stuff about Nate Wilson, maybe the Knox Unplugged, that kind of podcast and things of that nature. So this is kind of that Lewisy Tolkien-y space that we all kind of inhabit. A lot of people say Chesterton, but Chesterton, he's the nonfiction end of this, even though he wrote some fiction and whatever else. But yeah, it's interesting to me, and you said it's kind of written in that vein, which it is. And I guess for people who are interested in what this book is about, how would you pitch it?
I think for this book, it's mainly a book about bringing you into God's grace and His mercy toward us, and within the scope of everything that we see that can be called good, that's truly good. And I think that's what's missed. And like part of the reason I wrote the book, if I can go into that,
sure, was
like I was one of those people that when I found out God was absolutely sovereign, I was angry. I didn't like it at all. It was because I thought I was the good guy doing good things, helping his family out, and I didn't understand the fullness of it, So when all I heard when through a lot of John Piper's preaching and stuff like that, was that God was completely sovereign. All I heard was that, wait, we're puppets?
Right.
That's all I could hear. But what I didn't understand is I didn't have a category of worship for a God who is sovereign. I didn't have a category of worship for the God of common grace. I didn't want to worship that. And I think that's what it distilled to, right? I wanted to worship that I was this good guy doing really good things, and I felt good doing those things. But there was so much more going on that I didn't know. So now I have new categories of worship for this God that allows me to do these beautiful things, allows me to love my wife, allow us to have firemen, policemen, all these good, beautiful things that we have. So,
and in his sovereign plan, what we do actually matters. That was something you don't go a whole lot into the book on, because you're pointing out more the focus of like this God is this big and he really is all in all, and that's awesome and wonderful. But I think that was probably the thing that actually changed your like-dislike relationship with the truth is that what we do actually does matter, and both in failings and winnings, because God is sovereign. So, but yeah, go ahead, continue. I didn't want to interrupt you too much, but I just had to point that out. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think, and I'm going to get to the point with not just why I wrote it, but like what it's about.
Yeah.
And it happened in these last 5 years is that I basically saw that what became more clear to me is that we have an appropriation issue, but we have an appropriation of God's goodness.
Yeah.
And you saw that really clearly the last 5 years. And it just started like, I wasn't going to write a book. I didn't care to write a book. I'm a nobody. But the more I saw that, I was like, well, we're appropriating his goodness and we're claiming it as our own. So I was like, no. So what this book is about is it's an apology. I would frame it as an apologetic book about God's common grace and his justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I juxtapose together: common grace and God's justice. Mm-hmm. And I use film, and I use film quotes and a synopsis of film to get us to the point to understand that he is the ultimate good in what we see, and it's not us. And hopefully, someone reading the book God would open their hearts and minds to receive that and to see that it's a good thing. And if you go through an avenue like I did, where I was angry, there's hope because I'm no longer angry. I love it. I love it now that he's absolutely sovereign. I love that he's good. So yeah, and there's purpose in it.
And there's not only purpose, but there's lack of risk and worry. You know, it's not that there is no risk. We still have to make choices. We still have to be responsible before God for our choices. But at the same time, we know that God has the safety net of never letting you go if you're truly his. You know what I mean?
Amen.
And it's such a wonderful thing. I've had sort of a second wave in my life. Go back into my background just slightly. I'm a covenant child of Presbyterian origin. I was raised in a Presbyterian household. A lot of the children of my generation in my church that I grew up in have left the faith, like a very, very large amount. I'm talking 80+% probably.
Ouch.
Absolutely terrible, and a lot of that had to do with some things that were going on with the parents back. They weren't enforcing what was going on in the pulpit, and things just got kind of crazy between parents, even. And so it just was really crazy. But ultimately, I found myself being the guy who I tend to. I wouldn't say punch right as much as my punch left, but I tend to punch right a fair amount, especially because I was raised in a very grammatical, historical sort of context, and I believe in that. Don't get me wrong; like I believe in the value of that. But the thing that always seemed to be missing was, if we believe God is sovereign over all things, what does that look like in the corners? What does that look like in the dark places, in the interesting, California, Los Angeles, the movies, etc. How does that work itself out? And I think that a lot of the reason this doesn't connect for people most of the time is because they don't have something that they love to make them understand it, right? Exactly. And that's definitely where you came in with your desires of filmmaking and some of the movies that really touched you. You had a rubric for that. For my dad, who was a first generation Calvinist, not Christian, but Calvinist, his thing was music, and he's not 100% sure that he was converted before his conversion to Calvinism. He was that way.
Okay.
So he was converted in college. He's passed away. He passed away in 2020. He had cancer stuff he was fighting for years. But the thing was, he was really, really into music, the same way I'm really, really into like stories and poetry, right? He was the kid who his brothers got Emerson, Lake and Palmer back in the 60s, 70s for like a record for a birthday or whatever, and he would sneak into their room and put headphones on and listen to it. He was transfixed by music, and for his whole life he never really had an explanation for why, and it was always associated with the post-hippie movement of that period, the rock and roll and the music and whatever else. And when this clicked, like, it sank through this sanctifying blanket back over, all these rock and rollers who were, getting high and doing drugs and whatever else. And he was able to appreciate the art from God as opposed to, it's, like you said, it's common grace. So, but yeah, I mean, I grew up in the context of having a dad who did that and read me Narnia and Lord of the Rings, and that's what I fell in love with, right? Yeah. And seeing all my friends go off in different directions and do all their kinds of crazy stuff and whatever, the thing for me, I'm usually punching right on this issue because I'm like, guys, you don't really love your systematic theologies in the same way as you love a film.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they pretend that they do.
Right.
And so that's the thing. It's like, I've heard my pastor growing up, he would say his biggest advice to seminary students is get a personality.
But that's so true, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I think in the beginning of, or at least for me, I didn't grow up in a religious home. So when I came to faith, it was, I had a similar thing. You just start learning all these doctrines and these big things about God, and you don't, you just don't know how to act, and you don't
Right.
know, how to be a godly, mature Christian who's just loves God's goodness in His creation and knows how to walk that way.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
And
didn't mean to cut you off.
well,
But
I
yeah.
mean, I think you come out of a place where your life is so consumed by XYZ, movies, drugs, stories, even. It doesn't matter what it is. You come out of it where like you've built your whole personality already around a thing. And now you're
Right.
thinking, okay, not this thing, as opposed to, no, wait, this thing actually unlocks everything
Right.
else.
Good way of saying it.
So that you can actually, you have as much as God allows you for time in this world.
Right.
And beyond that into eternity, who knows? We don't have the full picture of that, right? He hasn't
Right.
given that to us. But yeah, it's such a funny thing because like I have my share of issues. I have my share of any issues just like anybody else. But I was raised with this full understanding, and I even had to punch right on my dad sometimes going, you don't really believe that. Things would get rough in the recession or whatever, and I'd have to say, no,
Right.
you don't really believe that, right? And sometimes I have to punch myself and say, you don't really believe that, right?
Right.
So my battle all the time is fighting with a stodgy reformed idea that everything is a machine.
Right, it's rigid. Yeah.
It's this rigid machine of life, as opposed to God is actually calling me to bombadil my way through life.
Right. And does it feel like I don't know. I'm 40. I'm 40. What am I? 41 now. I'm 41. But it feels like things are changing in our world with like, I think Christians are waking up to story in this way. And I know that I told you I found you through your interview with Jason Farley.
Mm-hmm.
And I really enjoy hearing him, right? Whether some people agree with him or not, I enjoy hearing with him because this is the kind of stuff we've all thought of, but we don't either verbalize it as him or verbalize it as yourself, how you do it so well.
Thank you.
No, definitely. And it's just, we need more people speaking that way, more Christians speaking that way, because these are true things that are happening. And, it's not this rigid, Calvinistic thought, Reformed thought. It's just not, there's life there, there's life in Christ that we need to live out. And so that's why I love hearing him speak,
Yeah.
on things like that with Knox. And,
Yeah, he's great.
And yourself. So,
Thank you.
So,
yeah, I really like this book because it was very personal for you. I could tell who you were through reading this. I think the strength of it is that. I think that that is something that you could even lean more into if you were open to sharing more of your story. I think it would be something that would be very beneficial to the reader because they can, at least take it as a memoir, in that way, even if they disagree with it.
right.
And people get connected with people. That's the way we're created. You know what I mean?
Right, exactly.
Don't be afraid to have someone read your story and be inspired by it, even if they get inspired wrong, because we have a sovereign God and it won't be wrong. Right?
Yeah.
But like, I think I wanted to go into specifically who this is for. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that before I go into it a little bit more. Yeah, just tell me what you think first, and then I'm going to bring in what I thought throughout.
Right. And you said that, sorry, I cut off a little bit. You said who this is for, right?
Yes.
Right. Now, I think I should preface this with, this is not something, ultimately, once you get deep in the book, this is not something people like to hear, right?
Right.
That God is good, you're not, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a good banner, right? It's a good,
yes.
it's a nice
it's a
little
hot
prayer,
take and a tweet.
Exactly, yeah. But the more you get into it, the more it's telling you God is the only one that's good.
Right.
Right. So this, if I say this is for everybody, I don't want it to sound like that's a cop out, but really I just think it fits with this generation. It's this me generation, this, I'm this good person doing these good things, and I set the standard of truth. And it's usually this standard that they've fixed for themselves of what is good and what's not good, right? So this is a book for everyone that's telling everyone, God is the one that's good,
Right.
and hopefully I lay out those arguments, with the movie quotes and that, but it's for everyone. It is an evangelistic book, so it's yes, it's geared toward non-believers, and that's what it's called, Mercy in Motion, and I took the other title away that I told you about earlier, but
Right.
I feel like that's a better title to get us into what it's supposed to be, to look at God and saying, God, thank you for your mercy in these ways you've dealt with us.
Right.
Yeah, but so yeah, I don't want to say it's a cop out to say it's for everyone. It is an evangelistic book, so geared toward unbelievers. But I say too, for the believer that's struggling with this, to now have a new category of worship.
Sure.
It's nice, and
Yeah.
But understandably it's hard. It's a hard topic to go through,
Right.
even though you think you wouldn't in the beginning.
Right. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Like, you said you were Los Angeles, then Houston, then Los Angeles. You obviously probably encountered a lot more of Christian culture in Houston, I would guess, depending on when you grew up. Yeah. So,
oh yeah,
for someone who was in Los Angeles their entire life, they may or may not be understanding what you're laying down when the Christianese area.
Right.
And that was that was my only overall critique of this whole thing, is like, if this is for non-believers, it's gonna have to be Christ haunted unbelievers. They've already had I live in Augusta, Georgia, so very much Bible Belt territory, and so there's literally no one here anywhere near here that hasn't heard some perverted version of the gospel at the very least. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's not that that's different than someone who's like, well, I was raised around Christians or raised Catholic or whatever. That's different than even that. They have some kind of gospel, whether it's the gospel or not, right? Yes. Or at least with the idea of a gospel. They can't they know that there is good news. They might be confused as to what that is, but they know that there's good news, and they know that there's a way to be right with God, whether they're right about that way or not. And so the point is, this would be great over in my neck of the woods. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It would be really, really great over in my neck of the woods. The thing that I think really knocks it home is the strong, hard tie to Calvinistic understanding and thought. You should definitely read Notes from the Tilted World. I know you said you hadn't yet, but when you get a chance.
No, I had it, and actually it jarred my memory. So I had it, and then I was trying to think of if I read it or looked at it, because I'm the guy who buys the books and doesn't read them.
Right.
But I think I remember feeling at the end of that book, I was just in a good way. I was like, oh, that's different.
Right.
But I don't remember any of it. I just remember I remember going, that's different.
Yes.
But at that time, I also thought Andy Wilson was Doug Wilson's brother. That's how much I didn't know.
Gotcha. Yeah. No,
not anymore.
But yeah. Well, where can people buy the book, find the book, etc.? I'm going to link it regardless, and go ahead, plug away anything else you want to, Freddie, and we'll move into just talking for a few minutes and go from there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's on Amazon right now. It's the only one that would take me. Really.
Mercy in Motion, Freddy Morales.
Mercy in Motion, yeah. Mercy in Motion, Freddy Morales. Just plug it in on Amazon, Mercy in Motion book, and you'll find it. Buy lots of copies and buy it for your friend. As I said, my daughter's birthday is coming up, so.
Yep, absolutely, guys. I'm telling you,
buy it.
It's not a super long book. It's really, really good. If you want a good, simple apologetic situation for that, I highly recommend grabbing a copy. Anyway, everybody, be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. Stay tuned for more on Poets at War.
Attention all Christian writers and creative peoples! Are you searching for a place to share your work and receive encouragement from fellow wordsmiths? Look no further than the Broodcast. Inspired by the legendary Inklings of old, a group of writers who banded together during the Second Great War. The Broodcast is your monthly gathering for inspiration, fellowship, and critique. Join us as we share our stories and support our fellow soldiers on our creative missions. Enlist in the Broodcast community today at joshuadavidling.com/brood. Travel cyberspace. Serve the greatest cause. Join the ranks of the Brood today.
Imagine if you had everything Tolkien ever wrote. Well, you can't have his, but you can have mine. The Ling Lyricanium is $10 a month, and you can find it at joshuadavidling.com/LL. That's joshuadavidling.com/LL.
I'm Ian Wilson, and I create graphic art using primarily traditional methods, supplementing with digital where it's needed. I use a real pen, a real paper, a real graphite to make my art. I like to feel my art. I've always been this way. I love the feeling of a pen or pencil in my hand, the sound of graphite scratching paper, and I love the sight of a nice black line making its way across the page. So why choose traditional art over digital? Traditional art has an organic, natural quality that seems to be missing from most digital illustrations. The illustrated books and comics that were made in the days before digital have an excellence and staying power that is just as vibrant now as it was decades ago. These are the stories that stay with you. Dr. Seuss, Winnie the Pooh, Where the Wild Things Are. People still read these. I'm currently working on my own graphic novel series, Legend of the Swordbearer, and I've also had the privilege to draw graphics for 2 motion comic series, along with illustrations for a small magazine, Logosophia magazine, and various book covers. Don't let traditional art fade into the dust. Help me keep it alive. You won't regret it. Visit my website at ianthomaswilson.com for more info.
Since you brought up this topic, Brendan, do you want to launch us off with I don't know, maybe one of your famous rants, because it feels like something you want to rant about.
And you haven't ranted in a while.
Yeah, it's true.
I haven't. I've been trying to show restraint. No. What the heck is with us turning villains into good guys?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so to be fair, I think everybody loves a good redemption story. I think that's sort of a something that, if we want to get theological right off the bat, it's something that every human soul wants to feel, because we all understand that we are not as we should be. We all understand that, like, unless we are actually pathological narcissists, or someone is actually a pathological narcissist, they may not think this. We all know that sin exists. Maybe not in that many terms, but we know that sin exists. We're not as we should be, all that. So the idea of someone being so awful, but then having them actually be good and understanding and stuff, understandable and stuff like that, I don't think that's inherently wrong. And I don't necessarily mind that as a story element thing. The problem is when it's the only story element thing. Or if it's not the only one, when the only other option is, oh, look, men are evil.
Right. Well, there's right up front, I'd say there's a difference between a misunderstanding story where the villain is just misunderstood and they have no real fundamental change.
Sure.
And a story where they actually change and join the good guys in the fight that was right all along. Fundamental difference between the two. I pointed all back to, obviously there were ones before this. There was a lot of subversion going on before this, but I point it back to the book, not the play, even though the play made it famous, Wicked. I point back to Wicked more than anything else.
Yeah.
But anyway, you continue. We can touch on Wicked if you want to, or go back to what you were saying. Either way.
Well, Wicked is the start, I think. I'm not even thinking about the book. I didn't know there was a book. I'm just thinking of the play. Wicked is the start, because the fact that I didn't know there was a book until just now tells you how common the book is, but we all know the play.
Right.
Everyone knows the play. And when you get that in the limelight, when you get that in the spotlight, that is, yeah, that's the thing. And so, and I also should say that, yeah, no, you're right. There's a difference between misunderstood and redemption, actual redemption, where they do something wrong, they ask for forgiveness. Zuko from Avatar: The Last Airbender, amazing redemption story, amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Now they also had 3 seasons of a show to do that, so you've got a different format here than like a movie. But
even though we don't see him as much as a villain, I'd put Beauty and the Beast in the same category.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Sure.
Yeah.
Beast is a pseudo villain, although he's not really, but he's a pseudo villain,
right?
In a way, he is an antagonist in a sense, in that he opposes Belle, who is the protagonist, and so being because he's against her, that automatically makes him an antagonist for a little bit. Then Belle changes and he changes, and they both they align, and so they're no longer protagonist and antagonist. But like the just listing out recent movies: Joker, Cruella, the Maleficent 2. Why are there 2 of them? I don't understand.
Money.
This makes no sense.
said Mr. Krabs.
Okay, I do understand. Okay, Mr. Krabs. Yes. Okay, but just like those are the big obvious ones. But I'm sure if we go digging, we can find more. But even in like, I don't know. It bothers me because like the misunderstood element to me is just another tick along the same line of in The Greatest Showman we mentioned in our brood chat, the fact that they decided to add in an LGBTQ anthem of "This is me, this is me, this is who I am. You can't change me. I'm misunderstood."
Mm-hmm.
It's the same logic. It's this going in the same direction, and that's not helpful. We need there to be an actual evil that is evil, because if we don't have an evil that is evil, then, like, I don't know. I think it's really bad for storytelling as a whole, right? There are some stories you can get away with not having an evil character. That's fine. But a bunch of people think that we're enlightened because we don't have Saurons, because Sauron is not compelling. And it's like, you're missing the point.
Right.
You know?
Well, if Sauron wasn't compelling, it wouldn't be a good story. That's the first
I was going to
thing.
say, I would argue that Sauron is totally compelling.
Right. Sauron's compelling because
the fall of a Maiar to one of the evil Valar. Yes, that's a good story.
Right, but we don't even know that in the text of it itself of Lord of the Rings necessarily. As far as that's concerned, I think what we don't know about him is the thing that's particularly exciting. And you can and that takes framing, and framing particularly good guys, and that's something I want to get into in a second. But like the thing that the 2 things that I'm constantly hearing are not good villains are Saurons and mustache twirlers. That's what people are always saying. Oh, this is just dumb. But mustache twirlers are fun, man. I'm just saying. They are so fun, especially when you do them tongue in cheek like Dudley do, right? Snively Whiplash, like.
But that's the other thing. There's another trope known as, pardon the language, known as the glorious bastard.
Mm-hmm.
The glorious bastard is a mustache twirler,
right?
But they're a mustache twirler that they would argue is done well.
Right.
Do you know what the glorious bastard is?
Explain it a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, explain it.
So the glorious bastard is an antagonist in stories who has such charisma and such presence that when they reveal their dastardly plan, the audience member can't help but yell, "You glorious bastard!" That is the logic
that's what I
behind the name.
That's what I figured that you meant whenever you said that. But yeah, they're great villains.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a whole bunch of things for the trope, but that's not the point. I think that everyone talks about like they want their villains to be believable is sort of, I think, where not the mustache twirler, because no one really twirls a mustache, just like no one really actually strokes their beard. I honestly, that's a joke on me, because I used to think, oh, nobody actually strokes their beard. That's just a thing people do in like movies and stuff. And then I found
Nope.
myself actually stroking my beard.
Everybody does it.
It's very calming. But like, I like Mr. Freeze from Batman as much as the next guy, but you can't have every villain be Mr. Freeze, is what it boils down to. And regardless, even in the Batman comics, just because Mr. Freeze is understandable doesn't mean that his actions are justified. And while it's a question on whether or not, like, some of these movies, the main characters' actions are justified, like Maleficent, or whatever. Like, it's not a guarantee. Like, I don't necessarily think that if you could go through a movie and go, oh, this movie is telling their story, but it's not necessarily justifying their actions. Yes, but it's harder to pull that off when they're the main character, and I'm not sure that necessarily gets through all the time. Right. Cruella, she's insane. Joker, he's insane. Arcane, show on Netflix, it has its problems, but it's really well written, and the villains, just because you understand them, doesn't mean that they're necessarily justified. You do feel heartbroken for them. Yeah. Because it's literally sort of like there's a past trauma, and that past trauma is how people would describe it. And that past trauma is what's like cascading and constantly haunting them and it's the reason why they make the decisions, right?
Right.
And it is, the first season is literally a tragedy. The story is a tragedy. And so it's like, okay, we're fine with this. Right. I know what this is. It is a tragedy, and so you're allowed to have tragic characters in it. But the villains are still villainous. Right. They're still bad, and what they're doing isn't a good thing, and the main villain is not painted in a good light just because, even though he says to one of the main characters that he loved her. Right. So it doesn't justify him.
So yeah, speaking in those terms, the best example of this, what we're talking about, and really he combines kind of all three of the different misunderstood villains that we've talked about so far. The misunderstood, where it's kind of like you're flirting with making him noble, whether you cross that line or not. The Inglorious Bastard and the tragedy, and that would be Dr. Horrible from Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. Good gracious, they do a good job. Are you unfamiliar with this, Alex? You're going to have to watch that soon. It was on the previously large, long writer's strike in the 2000s. There was the previous one, yes. Joss Whedon got a whole bunch of his people together to create a 45-minute independent film about the origin of a supervillain. Neil Patrick Harris, and it's a musical, and Neil Patrick Harris plays Dr. Horrible, and Nathan Fillion plays his good guy. This is before Megamind, but it's similar to Megamind in plot. But they do a fantastic job of making this guy likable, and then making him an Inglorious Bastard, and then making him a tragedy. In those three, those are basically the three, the act 1, 2, 3 of the whole thing. And good gracious, they do a good job, because he actually ends up evil. And it's more of a tragedy because we saw the misunderstood kid at the beginning. So there's a place for the misunderstanding factoring into who they are. There always is. Sure. But you cannot blame the misunderstanding on their stepping over the line.
Right.
That's the biggest thing.
And you can't be in a scenario where you're like, oh, I'm cast out from society therefore that's why I'm acting the way I am, and so I'm actually a good guy.
Right.
Which is where I think Maleficent trips.
Right.
And we can. I saw somewhere that there is an allegory for. There's like a rape allegory in the Maleficent somewhere when she loses her wings. It's a thing, but even still, that doesn't justify your actions. You know, it's like whether or not that's actually the case. I don't want to argue it. It's not even my point of view.
Freudian philosophy gets into everything, and it's gross. Continue.
Well, yeah, it's annoying, but yeah, the idea that you trusted someone and then they take something precious away from you overnight. Okay, I can see how that can lie, but yeah, it doesn't have to. We don't have to turn it into everything, like you said. It gets into everything and is gross. But regardless, the point still is like, just because someone does something bad to you doesn't justify. You know, it's like revenge stories, right?
Alex, why don't you jump in on this? You've been sniping, but you haven't really kind of made any volleys yet. What do you got for us on this topic?
Give us some volley.
Well, first of all, I looked up the Wicked book. It came out in 1995.
Yep.
It's older than I am.
Yep.
By like a fair bit. I didn't realize it was that old. But as far as the...
Boy, I was born in 92. What are you calling old?
I was born in 89.
Okay. Sorry. I'm a techie. Okay. Whenever I think of created things, like things that humans have created, 95 is pretty far back there. 95 was 3 years before the iMac. So that's old for the type of realms that I go in. As far as humans go, you're not old until you're 70.
There you go.
Yeah. But as far as the redeemable villains, or the type of story that you're telling, I brought it up several times. I'll probably bring it up a lot more. The Land of Stories is a fantastic, it is a really, really great series written by Chris Colfer, who is famous from his role on Glee, but don't hold that against the books. He tells in the first two books, the first one's called The Wishing Spell, the second one is called The Enchantress Returns, basically the continuation of the story of primarily Snow White and then Sleeping Beauty. The first one focuses on Snow White, or kind of on Snow White. She's the evil queen is the main villain of that book, and she is kind of done the redeemable villain type thing. It goes through, shows her tragic backstory, all that type of stuff, and she ends the book getting her comeuppance. Like, she actually legitimately gets punished for her evil actions, even though they show that she was... You can understand why she did it. For Sleeping Beauty, they take the exact opposite tact as Maleficent did, and they make her the most utterly irredeemable person you can possibly think of. And it works so well. I think that that series as a whole rides the line of having the misunderstood villains and then having the just utterly evil villains that you want to be destroyed.
Right.
And whenever you have them contrasted, like in book 1 and book 2, it actually makes the true evil of the second villain, the one who can't be redeemed, hit so much harder because you're expecting some form of redeemable aspect. And they give Esmia is her name, Maleficent, the Maleficent character, her name is Esmia. They give her a tragic backstory too. And they say, no, you don't get to go around and enslave the entirety of the Land of Stories.
Right.
Twice. That's not something you get to do.
Right.
And I think that it's an excellent book. It's an excellent book series that kind of shows the best of the redeemable villain aspect and not the worst. So I just wanted to throw that out there as far as it goes.
Yeah. So why, we've said you don't want to do that. Let's talk about why. Why don't you want to do Maleficent or Joaquin Phoenix's Joker, regardless of whatever you think about the film. Why do we not want to be making those sort of villains?
Do we argue that Joker makes him the hero?
I haven't seen
or
it. I
is he
haven't seen it.
simply the protagonist?
I haven't seen it. I just know that generally speaking, we've been moving the Joker into a category of glorious bastard where he is railing against how actually clowny society is compared to how sane he's acting, even though he's crazy, right? Like, I've been seeing more and more of that over the years.
There's been... No, go on.
It seems like that's the cultural narrative, specifically in the internet sphere, like the red pill people, because
black pill
of
people.
course it is. But
Well,
yeah, it is
no,
black pill.
I would argue not the red pill people, actually,
Yeah,
because this is a form. No, not even, or red, black, whatever pill you want to take. I don't think it's them that are saying that, oh, it's Joker who is the sane one, because what is Joker always railing against?
Mm-hmm.
It's the system, it's the culture, it's whatever. Joker's a cultural Marxist in a way.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
He is. Maybe this is okay. Maybe this is part of where I'm coming from. Like, going to college, growing up in public school, then going to college. I was into anime. I was into video games. Where do you think that landed me?
Right.
Amongst the nerds, amongst the geeks, and adjacent to the nerds and the geeks. It's not that large of a step. You get into the and D&D and all that stuff. All of this, you get this community insulated that is considered sort of like weird and out there, right? Well, then anyone else who's considered weird and out there gets lumped in with them, or is easy for them to infiltrate. This is why D&D subculture is so alphabet soup, and I hate it. Same thing with video games, same thing with anime, especially with, it doesn't help that there are anime tropes involved with that and all that jazz. I feel like a lot of those people, they are the ones who like Joker, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, basically any basically any female villain, but also Joker, because he represents. He is a representation of what they want to do, but that they can't.
Right.
Fair enough. I was completely forgetting the earlier internet fascination with Joker and Harley Quinn. I forgot that existed. I was talking about specifically the stuff that happened with the Joker film and the people the people who tended to go towards that. I completely forgot about the wider context going back farther. I just jumped on the internet whenever that happened. And I was like,
and I think that with the Joker film, you might have a real point there with the red and black pill, not because of the character, but because of the fact that it was portrayed on a traditional medium.
Yep.
That way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was saying. I was saying that I think that the cultural narrative is shifted, but I don't think that that's actually reflected in the filmmaking of it. Because, there is no question in anybody's mind what Christopher Nolan thinks of Heath Ledger's Joker.
Right.
At all. It is about as black and white as it can get.
Right.
So that's where I was going with that. I think that it might be more of the way that the culture is looking at the character. I don't think the character has shifted all that much, though he might be being ready to shift.
Yeah.
With films like The Joker, making him the protagonist, even though he is definitely the villain still.
Right.
Yeah, and that's I know that you asked a question, Joshua, and I will get to what I think the answer to that question is, but I do think it is worth mentioning something.
Sure.
Joker might not have changed in the Joaquin Phoenix variation. That could be a good thing or a bad thing. In Maleficent, I actually watched the original Sleeping Beauty. She says, in the original Sleeping Beauty by Disney, Maleficent says on the 16th birthday, the girl will die. will prick her finger on a spinning wheel and die. And it takes one of the good fairies, which incidentally is my favorite, to say, no, she won't die, she will be asleep. I can't undo the curse entirely, but I can change the parameter from death to sleep. And when she's asleep, I can provide a cure. In Maleficent, the movie with Angelina Jolie, Maleficent is the one who says she will be put in a death-like sleep, which is actually Snow White language, not original language.
Yep.
So they already toned down Maleficent's villainy for her own story to make her more, or not as fire, like she literally calls down hellfire in
All
Disney.
the powers of
Like,
hell! It's one of the best moments
yeah.
in Disney, honestly. It's
There
so
you go.
good.
There you go. And I mean, I was like, she was blatantly like, yeah, no, I'm for the forces of evil. She was very open about
She
that.
calls herself
in
the
movie.
mistress of evil in the movie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So like, I just want to point out the culture, like the stories. I think you're right. It's a cultural view of the character, which is why having them be the protagonist is a problem, I think.
Yep.
But we also want to point out that they're also twisting the character in order to make them sympathetic, both in terms of giving them a backstory and making their actions not quite as bad as the original.
Would we want to argue that that's kind of a either a byproduct, or is that them trying to look at the consumers, viewing them as consumers, and saying, no, you're right. They're giving them what they want, as opposed to giving them something out that they think will be good. They're trying to feed into the preconceived thoughts that they already have in the creation of that. Would you say that that's why they toned it down? Or do you think that they were just trying to tone it down in order to tell that story?
I don't see why it can't be both, but my
Both is good.
knee jerk both is good. My knee jerk reaction is that if they did that, it's either because they felt guilty actually making such an evil character the good guy, or it's we need to give them this concession, otherwise it won't sell. Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Some of it could be that they genuinely believe that, like tragic hero stories, which is sort of what these are in a way. Tragic, they're trying, because they're tragic protagonist, not tragic hero, but still, that's because these people don't believe heroes exist. It's one of the rants that a lot of people have against The Lord of the Rings, is that they I don't want to get into that anyway, because I disagree with it, but that's beside the point. So to answer Joshua's original question, do we think that why do we not like this? Do we think this is a bad thing? Should we avoid these? My general thought is yes. I think we should avoid them, with a caveat. And that caveat being, I like tragedies. And sometimes there's a certain level of catharsis to watching a villain's origin story, in a sense, right? I don't necessarily mind having a villain origin story.
Right.
I don't necessarily even mind us sitting, watching the villain origin story, and having there be a certain level of sympathy and empathy for the villain. But what we need to do is we need to make sure that we do what Arcane did. I'm going back to Arcane because I think it's a really good show, gosh darn it. And despite you understanding what the villain did, or what this character does, who ultimately becomes a villain as she falls into villainy, and despite seeing her and empathizing and understanding, you still weep that she became a villain.
Because she made a choice.
Because she made a choice. Well, yeah. She made it, yes, and actually, yeah, that's a good point. She made a choice to be a villain, and the fact that she became a villain is part of the tragedy of the story. It's not her being a girl boss,
right,
and going to heck with the system.
Right.
If the story is, go on. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I haven't seen Arcane, but I know just based on your description that she made a choice, because I know when a villain resonates as a villain, it's because they made a choice to do the wrong thing. Just like a hero makes a choice to do the right thing. That's what makes them a hero. That's what's great about it. Sam made the whole speech in Lord of the Rings about that, right? It's making the choice to go on, and Rocky makes this speech. Everyone knows this about the hero, but we forget it about the villain. This is the thing that made Regis Blackguard so amazing in Adventures in Odyssey, is he 100% said many, many times, but especially at his end, at his downfall, I choose this. This is my choice, and there is nothing anyone can do to stop me. I've read Invictus on this podcast before. The poem, I can't remember the name of the guy who did it, but look it up. The guy wrote this, I don't remember if it was on his deathbed or not, but he was not well when he wrote it. Have you guys heard Invictus?
I've heard you read it. I could not recite any of it though.
I might as well bring it up. This is the poem that William Ernst Henley. I go back to this poem whenever I am creating a villain. And when I say a villain, I mean a villain, not an antagonist, right? Because there are antagonists who are just bullies, who are, they're on the wrong side of things, but they could be redeemed, right? This isn't evil. Okay.
Sure.
So this poem is evil. Okay. And it's only evil in the viewpoint of a Christian. So some people hear this and they get excited about it, and they think of the wonderfulness of the human spirit. And that's what makes this so evil. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how strait the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. That is a villain. That is the heart of a villain.
Two things. Number one, the capitalization of horror in the third stanza is frightening. Really frightening. Yeah. Number two, that's just My Way by Frank Sinatra.
Oh, it is. It is. Without all the fun horn section and everything else. Yeah, absolutely.
Which sucks, because that song sounds great.
Oh, but, it does. It does.
Yeah, that's all that is. That is just My Way. With all the fun big band veneer.
My Way is the Inglorious Bastard.
Yep.
Well, yeah. So, one last thing about choice. What are Frodo's lines in Mount Doom? I have come, but I do not choose to do what I've come here to do.
Yep.
The ring is mine.
Yep.
And then he puts it on.
They cut that out.
Frodo acknowledges in his end, when he fails his quest, and he succumbs and becomes a villain temporarily.
Yep.
Very temporary villain, but technically, in a very, very broadest of sense, he says, I do not choose. He is making the choice to not throw the ring into the fire, and he acknowledges that. So,
yep, and the succumbing.
Lord of the Rings is so good,
and he is succumbing to the power of the ring, but he is also making a choice. He is finally broken, but it's also his choice. And that's what is so tragic about it. And I think that's the thing more than the Morgul blade that ultimately has broken him to the point where he says, I need healing where I can't get it anywhere else. Because he knows what he became, you know? That's crazy. Yeah, I wanted to go a slight different direction on this just a touch. There were two things I wanted to mention. One, I think a lot is made of the villain and the hero, especially one of the big examples lately has been Batman and the Joker, and how they even have these sort of meta discussions about how there's like a yin and yang kind of a thing. I don't believe in yin and yang, of course, but the fact is there's good and there's evil and there's always a pull. And as far as that goes, I think that we forget when we create a lot of people who create great villains forget to create great heroes, and vice versa. And you really, really, really need to focus on both in order to have a great story. God, look at him, created Satan to be the villain of the story. And he's done pretty well at his job. That's all I can say. He's very, very evil. And he made a lot of great heroes, but he made them great. And he made sure to take all the credit for the goodness that came from the creation that he set up. And Brendan falls out.
Oh dear.
So he'll come back. He'll come back round. I'll wait on my next part.
What's that thing that you put up whenever I had to jump off in the first episode I was on?
I don't remember. What did I put?
I don't remember. It was something about the goblins are attacking. Please hold.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Hey, you're back.
Yeah.
Sorry. My computer decided it wanted to commit seppuku. Anyway, continue.
Yeah. Well, I finished up that thought for the most part, basically just that you need heroes and villains, and you should not work on one at the exclusion of the other.
Is this Marvel's problem?
It is Marvel's problem, but it's also DC's problem. Well, DC from Nolan time period's problem in a lot of ways. I think that while Christian Bale's Batman was really, really good, they really focused on the villains in those movies, and not so much in the first one, but in the further ones they definitely did.
They hyper focused on the villains, and they removed any supernatural from the story.
Right. So basically the point that I'm making can really be summed up well. This was moving into my second point. So I'm going to use wrestling as an example here and give you guys a little bit of a very short lesson in the ways things have gone up and down over the years. When show business started really getting into wrestling, people knew that it was scripted and all this other kinds of stuff. There were two main companies, and things started to get really interesting and different and weird. There was WWF. Keep in mind, there were tons of territories and stuff, but two main companies were coming to the top. WWF, or WWE, and WCW. WCW was owned by Ted Turner, and then Vince McMahon with WWF. Anyway, WCW took over during the 90s for an extended run when they had arguably the best roster of good guys that you could ever ask for. They had good villains too, but their good guys were bad, awesome, just really top-notch wrestlers who were who often didn't say very much. Their chief guy was known, Sting, was known for almost never speaking. He played basically this non-speaking crow style character, like the crow from the movies and the comics. And he was one of the chief ones. Another one was Goldberg, who basically he would say stuff when asked, and he would talk to people and interact with people, but his main thing was just saying, "You're next," and he was more action than speaking, right? So they started getting this sort of thing happening, and the good guys who could speak spoke in ways that were quick-witted and got to the point. And they were really, really good at that. WWF, meanwhile, during the 90s, was giving us characters like Duke of the Dumpster Drozy, and everyone was a big joke on the good guy side. You had your evil villains, and there were a couple really good evil villains that just had swagger, and they were awesome, and people started cheering the villains and booing the good guys, because the good guys weren't any good. You know, they were bumbling idiots that they were trying to form as underdogs. But people were like, nah, I'm not interested in that. I want to see carnage, right? And I think the same thing happens in superheroes. I think the same thing happens in other places. And eventually, what was the thing that broke WWF above WCW? It was two characters, The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. The Rock turned from a bad guy to a good guy. And Stone Cold Steve Austin became a good guy because, well, he was a bad guy for a little while, but what happened was they created a story where Vince McMahon, he got injured, and Vince McMahon said, okay, you're injured, you can't defend your title, go home and get better. And he wanted to stay and fight and work, and he wasn't allowed. So they turned Vince McMahon into his main, you know, it's the working man against the suit, right? And that was the thing that made them get the rise over WCW, and WCW's bad business practices ultimately led to their collapse, right? So, and I could talk more about that another time, but it's just, I see that everywhere. Even in wrestling today, we still have problems with that, where Vince McMahon doesn't know how to create good guys that are compelling. He never really has. He knows how to make villains that everyone hates and wants to see their keisters get beat, and he actually knows how to make people hate bad guys, but he doesn't know how to make people love good guys.
Is that because he himself is not a good guy?
I think so, but that's my personal opinion.
So I watched a video about a cartoon show called like My Adventures as Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And I had originally thought that this was the show where they turned Superman gay. No, they just made Lois an extreme tomboy, so I didn't recognize her as a she.
Okay.
But the main point of the video is that like Zack Snyder and all these other people think that Superman is stupid because he's too good, that the fact that the Superman isn't like doing all this stuff, and they miss the point of Superman
right
as a character. And what he was saying was this show actually gets Superman right. And he was actually pleasantly surprised, because even though there was some woke nonsense, there was actually a lot of like Lois is not a Mary Sue, interestingly enough. And Superman is still Superman himself. He does the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And what, you know, it's so it's just interesting that, like you mentioned, like, you know, people don't know how to write heroes. It's like, yeah, that's probably true. Some heroes, like, you know, some heroes need to be heroic, and I'm sure that there's a, you know, again, going back to the argument of why people didn't like the Lord of the Rings movie, talking about Aragorn not being a confident hero character. I'm sitting here going, yeah, but think of the context that the country is in and that the world is in. Could you imagine how people would think if a politician showed up and said, I am going to be president because it is my duty and responsibility and divine right? Yeah, we would all freak the heck out.
We kind of halfway did with the, well, I was going to say with even though he didn't say it in those terms, he said it in very huge terms. He kind of did that sort of thing a little bit in his own words. But the fact is, like, not only do we not know what it's like to be a hero, but we know too much what it's like to be a villain, which is why we're getting these misunderstood stories. And the last thing that I really want to get at in this whole thing, on my mental list here, but we can talk however long we need to on this, is why it is so important. I'm talking to you artists that are listening and artist adjacents like Alex. The deal is this. we do have some amount, 90% of us, of those that don't have delusions of grandeur, of God-given talent. But that does not make you special. You are still a human being. You are not some elite class of, I know, right? You are not some elite class of artist that is misunderstood by the rest of the world. They might misunderstand you. They might misunderstand your intentions, but it is not their job to fully glean your intentions from your argument. It is your job to make better arguments. And to be clear as you can to the people who cannot understand your metaphors and highfalutin imagery and whatever else that you're using to try to describe what you're trying to describe. This is my problem. I don't know if you listened to the Stories Are Soul Food today, Alex, but this
I
was
did not listen to today's.
You need to listen to today's because they go into both N.D. Wilson and my issue with Christopher Nolan. And that is, and he doesn't have a major issue with him. He says he's a great filmmaker, all this other kind of stuff. But he makes his movies, first and foremost, as, to use a sort of pretentious phrase, communion with his own art.
Yep.
As opposed to,
Absolutely.
I'm making this for an audience.
Mm-hmm.
There's a level of selfishness in what he does that isn't necessarily wrong, but turns me off because I'm constantly thinking of the people that I'm making it for. And that's not me being morally superior or selfless to him. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying this particular thing bugs me because of these reasons. And I know people who like Nolan. I'm friends with a lot of people who are obsessed with Nolan, right? But I can't get into him because of that. Not everything. Some of the stuff, I like, but you see what I'm saying. So this is this kind of thing. Whereas Spielberg, for example, Spielberg's the utter opposite, right? He's like, I'm just going to make as many cool, awesome things as I can before I die and try to make it so that people will love it. Right. And it's very much for the audience. So I tend towards Spielberg. That's what I prefer. That's an artist thing. I'm not talking about artists and their art. I'm talking about art and people, because people can take that attitude, the Nolan attitude, and direct it at the people who just don't get it. And that's the thing that I'm telling you guys right now. The reason we have these stories of the Maleficents is because of folks who actually believe their own hype so much as artists that they put themselves in a separate category from the rest of humanity, as opposed to anyone can cook like Ratatouille. Right? And so... Now, can anyone make a great meal? No. But a great meal can come from anywhere. That's the whole point of Ratatouille. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to get at right here. And so, anyway.
When did Ratatouille came out? In 2007?
Yep.
Okay. Whenever...
Brendan's got stuff.
Two things. Two things. First is... in case there are any Christopher Nolan fans out there who are just not seeing what Joshua is saying about that, because I like Christopher Nolan, but in case there are any of you out there, Christopher Nolan specifically mastered the audio for the movie Tenet.
Yeah. Tenet, yep.
Only be good, to only be legible in high-quality theaters.
Right.
Not high-quality home theaters, not theaters. High-quality theaters. IMAX theaters are the only place where you can get the actually good mix for the movie Tenet. That's what that's what Joshua is talking about. He is talking about the fact that he is making it specifically for the highest quality experience ever. And that makes for really good movie watching if you can get that experience.
Right.
Most people can't.
Right.
That's what he's talking about. The second thing is, whenever you were talking about people are able to take that, I'm making art for art's sake, I want to make something good no matter what, and then directing that towards the people, my immediate thought is Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Because that's what Jobs' entire philosophy was. I want to make something good. I'm not trying to make something that people want.
Right.
I'm trying to show them what they want because it's good.
Right, and that
then
that can
pointed it
apply
towards the people.
And that can apply to someone who is trying to make something for an audience too. I think
Exactly.
Lewis struggled with this with the Space Trilogy. I think that when he created Out of the Silent Planet, it was more Nolan-esque. And then he tried to give them a little bit more in Paralandra, and then he actually, but he went too far Spielberg in a lot of ways, and he gave the exact right amount in That Hideous Strength. I think he gave everyone something that they could consume and enjoy, but it was everything he wanted to say.
Yep.
So.
But that was Lewis everywhere. I mean, Barfield's adage is what Lewis believed about everything could be found in what he said about anything. In every single thing that Lewis wrote, you can say, "Oh, yeah, that leads to this, and doors are open." I know Lewis's entire philosophy.
Right, and that's what
in
I think
every
people should
single
aim
thing
to
that
be.
he did.
That's what I think people should aim to be, is not Spielberg or Nolan, but Lewis. Anyway, Brendan, go with what you're saying.
No, I'm just.
Did I hurt your feelings?
I agree with you in the sense that, well, I agree and disagree with you about Nolan. I'm not a super huge Nolan fan. I like his work, but I'm not like a diehard, oh my gosh, it's Christopher Nolan, I must watch his stuff. It is so amazing. No, that's me with Peter Jackson. But I see what you mean, and I agree with you that Nolan is making art for himself in a sense, right? He is doing his own thing, but I think where Nolan falls flat is that he's out of touch with the average viewer, right? And so it's like, and that's where the Tenet line comes in. It's like, we are only mixing for the best quality theaters. And it's like, okay, Marie Antoinette, let them eat cake. You know, it's like that's the issue there. But as someone who has artistic tendencies, I would hesitate to call myself an artist, but as someone with artistic tendencies,
you're fine. It's fine. It's a label. Go with it.
I understand the level of introspection and level of desire of self in order to get anything done. And so, and I also, and I am more, you are more on the Spielberg side, Joshua. I'm more on the Nolan side.
Right.
I would much rather do the Steve Jobs of create something good and hand it to you and say, you want this. You don't know you want it yet, but you want this. But that's the thing. Nolan doesn't say, you don't know you want this yet. He goes, this is the greatest thing ever, and if you can't appreciate it, that's your problem.
Right.
Yep.
Yes.
And it's like, there's a huge difference in communication, but
so you say I'm Spielberg, but I also have a rhyming pro wrestling series. So I mean, I have my Nolan-esque side too. But like you said, I don't sit there and go, "Well, you just don't get it." Pro wrestling and poetry, and I shouldn't even explain this to you, you plebeian.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it seems as if we have more of an issue of, and actually tying it back to the original topic, we have more an issue of how the package is presented rather than necessarily with the package itself.
Yep.
And that's sort of what we mentioned earlier with the it's not telling these characters' stories, it's bad. It's how the characters' stories are presented and what and what that is and how that is perceived by the culture.
Right.
Right.
So it's the entire concept of editing is everything. That you can take up and edit it to be a horror movie.
As an editor, I thoroughly agree with this.
Yes. Yes. Well, I'm an editor in everything that I do. It's kind of funny, but like also I live edit and I performance edit all the time. I'm always changing, like little tweaks and things and here and there and whatever else, and that's part of the fun of creation. Ooh, what will happen if I do this?
Performance,
right?
The more you fix in production, the less you have to fix in post.
Right, exactly. And it's all time and pipelines, and it's so much fun. But yeah, this has been a good conversation. I'm going to wrap this episode here. Everybody be your family's bard. Do not turn to the right or to the left, and the Lord will be with you wherever you go. Don't be a villain, be a hero. We'll see you next time in the trenches on Poets at War.